Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to tap into consciousness and discover the greatness that's inside of you, then do we have the Tinker Dabble Doodle Try show for you. Today I'll be talking with Dr. Srini Pillay, a Harvard-trained practicing psychiatrist, brain imaging researcher, brain-based technology innovator, the award-winning author of Life Unlocked, and the author of one of my all-time favorite books, Tinker Dabble Doodle Try. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about letting go of the mind to tap into consciousness and unleash the greatness that's inside each and every one of us. That plus we'll talk about the dangers of the rational mind, creating your own reality, why you can't take your eyes off your iPhone, and why in the world the brain knows you're wrong even when it tells you you're right. So welcome to the show, Srini. Are you ready to shine?
I am, and I'm especially ready to join others in shining together. So thank you for inviting me again, Michael.
Woohoo! Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm torn. We were having a discussion before the show, and I'm torn even whether just to dump back to that or to give the briefest Dr. Srini Pillay 101. So I'm going to leave it to you. Dr. Srini Pillay 101, or right into what's been exciting you most about the mind and abstraction lately.
I think I'm particularly interested in things that are beyond cause, because I think that when it comes to simple cognition, like how do I get to the store or where do I buy something, it's causal to a certain extent. You've got to do something to get somewhere. Yeah. But I'm really interested in big goals and the way the brain processes information outside of pure narrative. So I think most of us make meaning of our lives by recalling what's happened in our lives. Most of us make meaning by saying, well, I was born here, raised here, this is what I did, this is what I'm doing, I'm in this relationship, these are my kids, and that's fine. The problem is narrative consciousness is not an adequate representation of the totality of who we are. And I think there are two kinds of consciousness that I generally think about. Yeah. One is a more material or perceptual consciousness, which is based on how we integrate information from the five senses. And then there's what I would call spiritual consciousness, which is really that which is beyond the senses. And I think one of my favorite quotes of all time is a quote from D.H. Lawrence, which is something like, "Man cannot live by his own will alone. With his soul, he must search for the source of energy in life, because it is life that we want." And I think for a lot of us, as Carl Jaspers, the psychiatrist and philosopher, said, for a lot of us, our finite existence is just not enough. I think we are filled with this urge to seek more, with these questions about, is there more? And I think when you look at an overarching definition of what spiritual consciousness is, it relates to needing to transcend just the perceptual world and needing to find some kind of meaning and purpose and integrative power and some kind of connection with a greater whole that will allow us to reach our goals much more easily. It's sort of like the path of least resistance. And so one of the things I've been trying to contemplate deeply is, what are the different ways in which we can access this path of least resistance? And I think for me, that has a lot to do with authentically connecting with narratives, but also realizing that our minds have symbols in them that are really strong symbols that carry meaning. Often they're condensed meaning, and they also have fragments of meaning, so things that don't make complete sense. So, for example, if I showed you a symbol of a teddy bear, like what would that bear mean? Or if I showed you a symbol of a fork, what would that mean? But already now, twice, I've heard you almost ask a question, so I want to know what you think.
Well, there are a whole bunch of directions I'm going. The last one, because my ruling non-narrative, I only know where you're at here. I try not to go back there, or I'm not present. And it's something I used to geek out on a little bit. I'd like to dive more into, which is understanding the ancient Egyptian brain. Because their mind didn't focus, from what I understand, or maybe what we're guessing, on so much sentences the way we think about it now, but on abstraction and symbolism, symbols in their brain and thinking in symbols. And I think in a sense, that's a bit of where you're going here.
Yes. So, and it's funny you should mention that, and I think interesting also, partly because this morning I actually was writing a little bit about what goes on in the consciousness of someone who's building a pyramid.
Oh, I love it.
So I think we are already traveling the same wave somewhere, and partly because I've just been suspicious a little bit about rational thinking, a little bit suspicious about technology, and whether it is truly advancing what we're doing. At some level, it is obviously, but at another level, I was asking myself, what was going on in the minds of people? They didn't have the tools we have now, but some people have built some amazing buildings. Like, do we really need the tools we need now in the way we think we need them? Or are we just getting rid of some kind of indigenous sort of way of processing information and replacing it with something more digital?
It's many more things, but something, Jessica and I have these conversations a lot. And one of the conversations we've talked about is how things like the iPhone, while it helps us to be fully connected worldwide, that versus maybe the Aboriginal phone. If we had none of that, if we had really stepped back, maybe in more of a natural way, did we have a greater ability to connect, or connect in a way that's lost because of the languaging of technology today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree that there are advantages and disadvantages to that technology. I think that the studies show that it helps people become more creative. It does create this greater sense of connection, a greater sense of access, greater kind of convenience. But at the same time, a lot of the apps that come on these phones are rigged to have us be addicted to them. So we're having a lot of dopamine surges that are going on in our brains that maybe we don't want as often as we get them. And I think that we also stop feeling truly connected to people if we become constantly distracted by this device that we're addicted to. So I think in that sense, it does pull us away from something. And it relates, I think, to the initial piece that we were talking about just before the show, which was, what are the ways in which I'm exploring, expanding this consciousness personally? And I've realized that with all the nonfiction stuff I'm reading up and reporting on, that I'm missing fiction, and I realized I was missing fantasy, and I also realized that you cannot create an alternate reality effectively only from reality. You actually have to figure out some kind of fantasy so that you have a template toward which you can move. And so I created this little mini narrative for myself, where I asked myself, I guess, two questions people ask me, and in the spirit of how they're being asked, one of them is to really annoy me. People would say, "What kind of impact do you want to have in the world?" And something about that always felt wrong to me. And so I finally was able to verbalize one aspect of it, and I said, "I don't want to have any impact on the world." And people said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Impact just sounds like I'm just having sex with something. I want to have a love affair with the world. Like, I want this to be a two-way relationship, and I want it to involve love and not just some kind of impact. I mean, it sounds so meaningless. Like, hey, I impacted the world. Like, isn't that great?
Like a crater on the moon."
Right. It's like, why would I want to do that? But then the second thing is, there's a lot of advertising about social service and a lot of advertising going on, which at some level, I mean, obviously the thought of social service and the thought of connecting with others is deeply entrenched in the work that I do. But the thought of advertising that it is deeply entrenched in the work that I do turns me off in a certain way. And so even though people don't always intend to ask me, like, how many patients do you see, or what corporations and how much suffering do you alleviate, at some level I was thinking, I want to figure out the way I will give the most to the world is if I am most deeply connected to my own narratives and symbols. Because then my authenticity will heal something in myself and in you simultaneously. And so I started to create this narrative, and the narrative was the way I think what I'd like to do, and it's very scary to people when they hear it because it sounds so self-indulgent. It's sort of like, I'd like to get up in the morning and sit in the upper loggia of my home and cut into some melon and look at the ocean, after which I'd like to go down to the drawing room and talk to somebody for 2 hours in my smoking jacket, after which I'd like to play some tennis, and then maybe have the butler bring some drinks, after which in which there'd be a shower there somewhere, and I'd like to have some cognac in front of the fireplace. I think it would be really amazing. And, it sounds like such a literary dream in a certain way, because it's such a visual dream. And for me, it's connected to some of the literature of D.H. Lawrence. So symbolically, everything that was associated with my own delights and traumas related to that phase of my life becomes condensed in this narrative. And the narrative is not just the story I told you, but it's empowered by the symbols that came with that time. And anyone who knows me would know that this, in an odd way, it really does align with who I am in terms of my preferences or absurdities. There's an absurdity to that image as well that I think captures something for me. And what I thought was really interesting is every year I have this tradition with my closest friend where we take each other for our birthday months to somewhere unknown is how it started. So we just meet at the airport and we'd show up with passports, and the other person would take care of everything. And so it's such a nice feeling to actually have that week of your life where you're not thinking about anything. But what was interesting to me was that last week was that week for me where we went away, and I like going to London a lot. So we went to London, and pretty much 90% of the narrative, I had not told him any of this narrative, but pretty much 90% of that narrative was achieved. Meaning, in some odd way, without his knowing anything, he suddenly said, "Oh, listen, I arranged this fitting for you, and I'm getting a smoking jacket made. The hotel we stayed in had a drawing room. The room had a butler button. He arranged tennis every morning, and toward the end, we went to this restaurant where we had cognac in front of this fireplace." And it sort of struck me. I was like, how? I know I was very dedicated to this narrative in an almost absurd way, but what is happening here? Is it that my narrative, his mirror neurons picked up my needs and created that in a week? Or was I beginning to manifest something from aspects of consciousness that were not just in my head, but outside my head, and that together we were co-constructing this reality? And I think for a lot of people, this question of, well, it's not just a question of attracting something into your life, it's also a question of constructing something into your life. And so as I'm beginning to paint on the palette as I'm beginning to sort of tap into the palette to paint on this canvas of life, I suddenly realize that there's a lot more that I can do to deepen my authenticity. And that narrative took me from a level of authenticity that was here to a level of an authenticity that was here. And I started to operate in the world like that. And I feel when you operate into the world like that, you are at some level accessing consciousness outside of your head. And so, the famous mathematician Srini Ramanujan used to say that numbers were deposited into his head. I mean, they came from the atmosphere, and he suddenly developed all these formulae. So someone asked me recently, if you had to explain how someone can be that inspired or suddenly get this access to this information, how would you explain that? And I said, well, firstly, I don't know. So that's the bottom line. But I have a hypothesis. And my hypothesis is that information lies in electromagnetic circuits that exist outside of our brains, and that if we determine to say that consciousness is not restricted to this, but that our brains are simply transmitters of global consciousness, that we can then access these electromagnetic fields. This is something I discussed in the last chapter of my book, but we can access these magnetic fields and, as a result, access information. So the next thing would be, well, that sounds like an interesting theory, but do we have any evidence to show that information can exist outside of our heads? And I said, well, we have a lot of cool inference. So, for example, if I feel we have mirror neurons across short distances, right? So two people who are close to each other emotions are contagious, intentions are contagious, and actions are contagious. Meaning if one person feels an emotion, it gets automatically transmitted to the other person. Well, what's an emotion? An emotion is an activation of an electric circuit. So how does my electrical activation lead to your electrical activation unless electricity is traveling through the air to you somehow? So that's the first piece of data that I would say at least softly supports that. Then I would say, and I think we've talked about this particular one before, where they had a particular situation where they tried to see if you think a word in, I think it was in France, whether you can, a person in India can know that you're thinking it. That's basically, and you can, and that basically says that electricity doesn't just travel across short distances, it also travels across long distances. Now, if there's all this transmission going on between you and me and everyone who's listening to this, it means that there's probably a lot of electromagnetic circuits outside of our heads with a ton of information that we can access. So if we stick to the straight and narrow path, then we're not expanding this consciousness. You know, David Lynch, the movie director and artist, once said, if you view the world with a golf ball sized consciousness, you will have a golf ball sized understanding of the world. But if you expand your field of consciousness to something outside of yourself, you will tap into what that inspiration is. And I think what tapping into that inspiration is simply orienting at least your unconscious brain to these electromagnetic fields that carry information, and then filtering it through your brain to see how you can express that in your life. And so from my perspective, that can be done more easily when you feel your psychological center of gravity, which is your authenticity, which I think comes through even seemingly incredible stories like the story that I told you. Because even though it wasn't the exact same image of me sitting in my house doing those things, the fact that so many elements came together at the same time made me think, you know what, I want to play with this some more. Like, I want to think about this more. And I love how that deepening of consciousness, another great example of this is Grayson Perry, who's an artist in the UK, who is also globally recognized as one of the top 100 most powerful people in the United Kingdom. And he's an interesting man. He's married to a female psychotherapist. And he realized when he was very young that he was a transvestite, so he cross-dressed. And now he's still cross-dressing. So he shows up at major parliament meetings, and he wears clothing of older women. And part of what he's doing is experimenting, but part of what he's doing is also expressing himself. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you have to do something that you're afraid of doing or something that... But I think if there's some kind of authentic thing you want to connect with in yourself, then my first point is raise the level of authenticity in your life. Because when you do, it will increase your power in the world.
This is fascinating to me because one of the talks I was going to talk about the brain as a receiver. I was talking about going to a place of no mind. And certainly I wanted to talk about, and we'll want to try to get to a little bit about brainwave state. But when you're talking about authenticity, this is really striking because it's a whole different way of thinking about things. Because I'm always challenging people to look at what your energetic state is, your brainwave state, what your energy is that you bring to the table, to be in a place of passion and excitement and life. And you surmised it, you put it into one word that says if you can get into more of an authentic state, you're open. I call it open-hearted warrior. You're more open to receive.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're more open to be in this love affair. Because then you're not constricted and defensive. You've figured out a way to allow your psychological center of gravity to stabilize you even in the most difficult situations. Now, you might say, well, you know, even if I wanted to dress in all women's clothing, or like, how could I possibly do that? Well, you don't have to choose that. You can choose a lot of other things that are much more socially acceptable. Like somebody... So I've, as a result of this form of thinking, I've started to indulge in idiosyncratic behaviors that I feel don't necessarily get in the way of other people. So one of the things I've done is I've decided, so there's this teddy bear that someone gave me as a present, which I particularly like. And I thought, you know, sometimes it crosses my mind that it feels just a little bad to leave the bear at home. And so the other day, somebody invited me to a really formal meeting.
I got to let you know something, Srini.
Yeah.
I travel worldwide with my teddy bear.
Really?
Yes, and my teddy bear wears a Hawaiian shirt that used to be our kitty cat shirt. And so you can catch me traveling anywhere. And I've got all my professional gear with me, and I've got Teddy.
Yeah, so you understand this. And I just thought, you know what, I want to bring this bear along with me, like, wherever I go. And so I go to this meeting, I'm dressed in a suit, in a fairly formal attire, and I'm holding the teddy bear at the Four Seasons Hotel in Boston. And the first response is, oh, that's a very cute bear. Did somebody give you the gift? I said, no, it's an old bear. Well, how come you brought the bear? I said, I don't really know. I'm just, the bear is there. And somebody asked me to sort of deconstruct what that might do. Like, isn't that just a little too childish? And, it really, I mean, it might be, but depending on who, for me, it feels more authentic. Mm-hmm. And one way to think about this is that if you superimpose a child's mind with an adult mind, then you are accessing two different forms of thinking. So for infants, for example, if you put an infant in a brain imaging scanner and you show them one doll plus one doll equals 3 dolls, they will stare at it and the brain's conflict detector will just go haywire. If you show them one doll plus one doll equals 2 dolls, they look at it and look away and the conflict detector is quiet. Which means even without knowing the arithmetic operation, the brains of infants are somehow wired to infer that something's wrong. So that's inferential knowledge. Later on in life, we acquire operational knowledge, like learning how to do arithmetic. And then we know 1 plus 1 is not equal to 3. So when you carry the bear, one of the things you're doing is you're activating inferential knowledge to make you navigate things faster, because you are simultaneously possessing, and this is a hypothesis, of course, but you are simultaneously possessing both an inferential capacity and then your logical brain, your adult logical brain. So for me, that's one of the elements. But it's definitely not, I would say it's just a retrospective analysis. I would say that there's some kind of comfort and some kind of interest I have in bringing this bear along with me. And I haven't actually figured out yet exactly what I'm doing, but I know I'm up to something. Like I know I'm up to something because I'm drawing into my life people in ways that are just, they're not obvious. I finally decided that the place I'm at right now in terms of communicating the science is that all my life it's hurt me that art and science are so separate. It makes no sense to me intuitively. I always loved math, I always loved music. And it's not just that I loved them, but I saw the relationship all the time. And I think a lot of people know that that's the case. But what about actually just doing that in the world? Like just bringing why should musicians be in one corner and then scientists in another corner? I want to deliver the science that I want to deliver through artistic media. And the moment I said that to myself at that level, I suddenly realized that, I met with a documentary movie maker recently. And we talked about how he could bring his level of awareness in cinematography, and I could bring my level of awareness of brain science and human psychology, and we could create something not that was instructional, but something that was captured by the cinematography. It's the art that should be the vehicle for the science. And to me, this is the next level of thinking that we need to engage in.
So we're talking about rational mind. We're also talking about creativity. We're talking about music. And I wonder how much it is turning down or stepping beyond the rational mind that allows us to access something more.
I think it definitely does. I mean, my book, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, actually addresses this exact issue. If you think about it, most people would say that about 90% of what's going on in the brain is unconscious, and only about 10% or even less is conscious. So we know that we want to tap into this unconscious mind and learn how to till the soil of the unconscious. But I think a metaphor for this that I think of is that rational thinking takes us on the roads through our minds. But our minds have roads and fields. And in order to venture off into those fields, you often have to use many non-rational processes to be able to access those parts of yourself. So I think things like meditation, for example, are things that take you out of the rational sphere and introduce you to a different operation of your mind. We've talked about this before, so I won't go into detail, but things like positive constructive daydreaming or doodling or napping for 5 to 15 minutes or pretending like you're somebody else or using possibility thinking. I think these are all really important ways that you can become unfocused so that you can look outside of the rational mind. But my sincere belief is that the rational mind only presents a certain amount of opportunity for the integration of identity. So Wilfred Bion, who is someone who studied the human psyche, talks about the fact that there are parts of our lives we can put together rationally in a narrative, and there are parts of our minds that are fragments that resist the narrative. So they might be paradoxes, like I'm happy and lonely. Or it might be a part of yourself that you can't quite define, but that's really important about who you are. That intangible aspect of who you are. Mm-hmm. These elements lie about in consciousness, and what we've got to do is ensure that they are bound by what many people in that field would call libido. So libido, at its basic, beyond just sex and anger or aggression, is really this kind of motivational life force. And the more you allow this motivational life force to be unleashed within you, the more it will bind these different components. And according to many people in the field, that will lead to no psychological or physical symptoms. But the moment you have a disruption in the flow of that libido, then you have something that's repressed or suppressed, and these fragments do not hold anymore. And when they don't hold anymore, then you start to see symptoms in your life, symptoms of that suppression or repression. So for example, for both of us, taking our teddy bears all over the world, it's sort of like, we don't volunteer that information necessarily. We don't lead with that. We don't say, hi, nice to meet you. Here's me and my teddy. But at some level, we are not repressing our desire for childlike needs. Right. We are saying we can operate as adults, we can be responsible, and we can also have childlike needs at the same time. And I think if children learned that, I think if parents taught their kids that even as they grow up, to hold on to the innocence of childhood, to hold on to the curiosity of childhood, because it is this curiosity and exploration of the fields of our consciousness that will allow us to discover things. If you ask me what do I think my strongest trait is, I would say it's probably confusion. Like I am almost perpetually confused about what's going on. I almost never know what's happening. I always tell people I both believe and don't believe anything that I'm saying.
Is that what I call I call it the empty cup syndrome? What I think I know today, I know I don't know tomorrow, so I don't even know it today.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because if you know something, then then why be an explorer or a discoverer? Then you know it. But when you are confused and you are constantly looking for what this other thing is, you find yourself on a journey that's incredible because you're not following somebody else's path. You're not following somebody else's idea. You're just on the path trying to find what you're looking for. And I think man's search for meaning is important. And I think if you look at how kids learn, for example, they learn really fast if you think about it, right? I mean, in a couple of years, they can speak, walk, talk, learn how to use different parts of their bodies differently, eat. That's a lot of learning. And if you look at adult learning, it's difficult because we've killed off curiosity. We've taken curiosity out as a driver. We're like, no, you're an adult, you cannot be curious. So now you have to be motivated about your life, but you've got no curiosity. It would be like a child saying, no, I'm not going to try walking. I just need to know how to walk like that. Like, I'm going to go from the lying to the sitting to the standing position. It's like, no, I mean, how, if the child was not curious, was not holding on to stuff, was not trying something, they would never get to the standing position. Yet we expect ourselves to somehow get to our optimum levels of being without being curious. And so, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try is really about activating that curiosity. And it's about saying to people, curiosity is simply saying, I have questions and I'd like to find some answers. And we don't have to land on answers as being the ultimate truth. The scientific method, paradoxically, is not about the ultimate truth. It's about continuous reinvention and continuous rediscovery. It just gives you a framework that you can use to understand, to proceed with your life. So I think if you're looking to get to a goal, if you're looking to make more money, have better relationships, raise your kids in a more successful way so that they are happier, feel happier yourself, whatever it is you're looking to do, I think number one, which I think was the primary theme of what we talked about initially, is connect with that authenticity. Number two, build on that authenticity with curiosity. Because the more curious we are, now at some level people might say, well, that sounds great. I mean, I'm sure I'm curious enough, but I don't have the time to be curious. And you're probably right. But my message here is build the time to be curious and make it a priority. Because if you don't make it a priority, you're never going to discover what you want to discover. You're always going to take what's right in front of you, but you're never going to find that special something.
Which means at the end of the day, I don't know, a less strong, here's some good poor English way to put it though, a weaker way to put it, you're not fully living.
Right, and you're not really exhausting your possibilities. You know, the author John Kehoe wrote in his book, which is what I think Money, Success, and You is the book, that he did an experiment once. I think it was with his secretary, where it was just over Easter, where he said he was going to leave a bunch of gifts around, and they were going to do a hunt. And so initially he said, "Well, I left some stuff around the room for you. Let's start the hunt." And so his secretary started looking for stuff and found 3 or 4 things and said, "Okay, I found them." And he said, "There's more." And so she said, "What?" He said, "There's more." And so she started looking for more things. And then eventually he said, he gave her the actual number, and then she started looking for it, and then she found them. But when we set the bar low in our lives, we say, "I'm just taking these 3 steps and that's it. If I get rejected here, I'm not going any further." We stop allowing for the possibility of more. And so I feel like as an attitude, having the possibility of moreness, knowing that what you're searching for, there will be some fragment out there that will resonate, that will make you feel something if you keep going. Having that momentum built out of curiosity and out of the strong desire to give yourself more power by being more authentic, I think that's where the action is. And I think that when we, along these very linear discoveries, you know, let's say we say you want to make more money, so you're going to look on LinkedIn for a different job, or you're going to look for jobs online. I mean, that's one kind of exploration. But you can explore in a completely different way. I mean, what is the chance, do you think, that you will find an answer to your problem with a teddy bear that will be identical to an answer without a teddy bear? Like, I think it's not very high that they're going to be identical.
No, I'll take the teddy bear answer, actually.
Yeah, me too. And so I feel like for anyone, you don't have to attack every problem directly. Mm-hmm. In fact, a lot of times, attacking problems like that is like chasing after butterflies. You know, what you want to do is, I think, at some level, think about a scene and run it through your mind that is somehow connected, but you're not sure how it's connected. Like, what if I said, if you had to live your life like a meal that you really enjoy, what meal would that be? You know, it's like, well, so let me ask you that. So
I'm playing with it right now, and I don't know. My first thought that comes into mind was my oatmeal, but not my oatmeal. It's all the different fruit that I loaded it up with. The berries, the bananas, the strawberries, the hint of honey, the dash of cinnamon, and all this richness to it.
Now, if you were to carry that with you as an image all day, right? Just say, you know what, I just made my perfect bowl of oatmeal. And I made this oatmeal, and I want my life to be like my oatmeal. Like, how would you metaphorically begin to describe what might change? Like, what in your life currently is not like your oatmeal?
It's an interesting way to put it, because the first thought that comes to mind is I'm going to bring more sweetness into my life, more joy into my life. And so then I have to say, what areas don't have as much sweetness or joy in them? Or where can I bring more berries into my life?
Yeah. And I think, so if I had to ask you in yourself, where would that sweetness come from? Like, if you had to authentically bring that sweetness into your life, how might you bring it into your life?
More time in nature, more pausing between the notes, and when I'm out, not that I'm not present, but allow myself to truly be out more without concern for what needs to get done when I get back.
I think all of those things would constitute that. Excuse me. And I think for every person, that's a different thing, right? I mean, I think one big piece for me is forgiveness. Like, I think self and other forgiveness is such an important variable, because when you have self-forgiveness, you unleash your curiosity because you have the permission to make mistakes. When you have other forgiveness, you unleash the burden of the negative connection that you have to this other person. It's not even necessarily about the other person. It's about saying, I don't want to be attached to this person through resentment. The moment you bring resentment into your life, you're carrying it. So that's not to say that, like sometimes people make me angry or sometimes people do things to hurt me, but I don't necessarily want to re-engage with them. But that doesn't mean that I have to hold on to a negative sort of binding energy with them either. And it's only negative if it's negative. There may be some people who want to hold on to that energy, and I think that's fine. But I think from my perspective, the sweetness does come a lot from self and other forgiveness. And I think, sometimes people's eyes glaze over when you say things like self-forgiveness. They're like, oh, whatever. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I messed up. I don't feel good. And I'd say it's not really about standing in front of a mirror and saying, I forgive myself, or saying, it's okay, or giving yourself a pat on the shoulder. Like, I don't find, like, when I'm competitive about something and I want to win something and I don't, and someone tells me that's okay, I don't like that. I feel like I don't want to be comforted about that. I just would like your company as I try to figure out how to get somewhere. So I think sweetness, to a certain extent, doesn't have to be that overt, like patting yourself in the back. The self-forgiveness comes from, and that happened. You listen to tennis players say this, like, I played badly, I lost the match, on to the next one. So that's a form of self-forgiveness that's more about saying, I refuse to carry all this negative energy around into the next phase of my life. I'm revamping. I'm resetting my brain, resetting my life, and moving on to the next stage.
Which is hugely important. I had an interview yesterday, a beautiful interview. It was outside of my normal scope. It was a phone interview, so it wasn't video. I set everything up. Everything's good. Double check my recorders. Good. Go for it. Do the interview. Goes beautifully. Recorded normally fine. But I was supposed to hit one additional button since I was only recording my side from a different software for the video aspect. It wasn't in my normal, I've done over 700 interviews. I've only done maybe 5 interviews this way. It wasn't in my normal checklist. I went through my checklist on autopilot, but present. Do I have this? Do I have that? Do I do that? And so I got done and I'm like, I don't have the video of my side. Oh crap, that sucks. Really wish I had it. Didn't get it. I've got another interview tomorrow. Okay, I wish it was that way. I've got to move on. If not, let me just put an elephant on me.
Yeah, exactly. I just think, and it really does strike you when you realize we make such a big deal of so many things all the time. And right now people do die. And so why not just figure out a way to support the people you want to support and have them support you? Because we're all trying to make it through this life one way or another. There are not the privileged few who figured out how to be happy. Like that whole idea of like, I figured out how to not, there's some truth to that. But, there are people with zero education who are incredibly happy. Look at photographs of kids in extreme poverty. The poverty is not good. Their situation is not good, but it doesn't necessarily impact the way they're smiling. In fact, you can see people often with a lot of material possessions who are not smiling. So I think we make assumptions and we think we know a lot of the time. But for me, not knowing is the most important thing. It's the most important gift we can give ourselves. And when you realize you don't know, then self-forgiveness becomes much easier.
Awesome. I want to dive into the spiritual side of things. But since you say self-forgiveness, to me, it always comes back to, which kind of is a spiritual side of things, love and kindness for ourselves.
Yeah. No, I think that is incredibly important, but I think the kindness, I think is sometimes misconstrued, and I think that we have to. So, for example, if I was in a competitive race, I used to sprint competitively. If
we're talking running,
yeah.
What distance?
100 meters. So
okay,
it was just a short distance. It was really sort of interesting to me that if I lost a race, I wasn't looking for somebody to, say that's okay, it's fine. If I came second or third, it's like I wanted to win, and I wanted to win for me and for the team that I was on. So in my mind, the whole idea of being kind to yourself, to be kind to myself in that instance, is to train harder and better and to win. It's not to say don't worry, that's fine, you can lose. So I think sometimes we push it over to the other side where we think kindness is simply reassurance. But I think reassurance can be good, but it can also be problematic when it's not indicated. Because sometimes you don't want to be reassured. It's like, I think somebody recently I was talking to, a friend of mine was sitting with his wife, and he was actually thinking about his next job thing. And we both offered a supportive sentiment at the same time, saying, you can do pretty much whatever you want on your own, which I think we both thought at the time was a supportive thing to say to him. When I talked to him subsequently, he said, yeah. I said, well, what are you thinking of doing? He said, I don't know if I want to talk about this. And I said, why not? And he said, because when you both said that the other, it just felt so condescending. Like, why did you feel the need to reassure me? Of course I know I can do this on my own. So now you're telling me what I already know. And it's funny because we thought we were being supportive, but he didn't need that at the time. So I think a lot of it is tuning into your own needs and being authentic about what that is, rather than just offering pat kind of meaningless reassurances that don't really do what you want them to do.
Excellent. Let's go from there. I'm going to switch gears. I want to cover a couple more topics here today. First off, consciousness and spirituality.
So, as I said earlier, I think that the spiritual is both. There's a kind of there's a consciousness is material and spiritual, and I think spiritual is that which is either beyond will, as Lawrence pointed out, or beyond the finite, as Jaspers pointed out, or something to do with transcendence, meaning, purpose, integrative power, or this kind of interpersonal connection and this multidimensionality that I think every human being possesses. So spirituality may or may not be associated with a religion. Either way, navigating spirituality is I think a very different way of navigating consciousness than navigating perceptual consciousness. So perceptual consciousness is basically about, how do I get somewhere? What's the logical step? What time am I meeting Michael? These are all sort of obvious, logical, linear things. I have it in my schedule. I have a calendar reminder. That's fine. But how do I get to a spiritual place with Michael? Well, I can't be sitting here thinking, okay, I'll use strategy 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I have to just be attuned to who you are as a human being on the other side and sort of understand where our consciousnesses will meet. And just by my bringing that awareness to just this moment in our interaction, it enhances some kind of spirituality. And I think,
thank you.
I feel that Daniel Siegel offers a really lovely sort of paradigm for this, where he talks about presence, wholeness, and resonance. And presence, I think, essentially is having the intention to synchronize, as I pointed out, listening and being attuned to emotions, but also seeing things from another person's point of view. Like from Michael's point of view, am I answering the question that his audience needs? As opposed to, let me tell you what I feel like telling you. I want to understand, which is why, because I know the people who listen to your show are people who are parents and care about their kids. I use more examples like that because I'm thinking about the show from your perspective. I think wholeness has something to do with reverie. So as human beings, we can't discover the other person if we're only pursuing these 6 questions, these 6 strategies. We kind of have to wander the way we do to suddenly come upon this moment of synchrony where we feel whole. But I think this relates to what we talked about earlier, which is authenticity, which is that when you realize that you are a vulnerable human being, is when you can feel more whole, paradoxically. Because then you accept something about yourself, and you can use your strengths and not be afraid that your vulnerabilities are some secret that's out to get you. And then resonance can actually be achieved through synchrony in movement. So by tandem walking or by dancing, you can actually enhance your resonance and trust with another person. So spirituality, I think, requires presence, wholeness, and resonance. And I think consciousness is a faculty of which I think consciousness is essentially about the flow of information throughout the world that our brains, and I think the rest of our bodies, can help us channel or process. So spirituality, to me, refers to the fact that we need to look not just within ourselves, but outside ourselves as well. I think the critical question here is, are we a collection of separate brains, or are we a connection of separate brains that are also connected like the beads on a necklace? And My preferential experience is to recognize that we are connected, and that because we're connected, our consciousness is going to flow, which is probably why I would even mention a teddy bear. I don't think I've mentioned a teddy bear in any interview in my life before. So the fact that I would mention a teddy bear must mean that there's some kind of consciousness that I'm tapping into that makes me comfortable enough to mention that. So I think that spirit is an opportunity, and I think it's an opportunity outside of anatomy to understand the illusion of physical form, because there are many unanswered questions for me. I think for me, as a doctor, I've seen many dead bodies. I've worked in morgues. I've done pathology. There's an energy around a dead body that just does not feel like there's nothing there. Mm-hmm. It makes you wonder. I'm not saying.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's like when you see. So when a body dies, does consciousness die? And you could say yes, that person's consciousness dies, or you could say no. The transmitter of that particular person or instrument is that the consciousness is continuing to flow through new life, through new beings, through all beings. So the consciousness is not gone. And so I think you can feel that even though the apparatus is turned off and there's no breathing and there's no heart rate, that somehow there's a consciousness energy that surrounds that person. Now, someone could say, oh, that's nonsense. How do you know that it's there? I don't know that it's there. I'm speaking subjectively, but in the same way that I don't need to justify why I love how a rose looks. I don't need to justify the existence of consciousness. And what I feel is that we have restricted ourselves to rational thought as the only way of navigating the universe. But I don't want to do that only. I want to understand the world through faith, through a forward leaning into the world with open eyes that are open with curiosity and wonder. And I want to ask questions. I don't want to only sort of know where I'm going and know the linear path. And so some might say, but that just sounds like nonsense. You're trying to justify a way of navigating the world that's not rational. And I will say, well, maybe it's nonsense to you, but to me, I want to figure out how to traverse these paths in my mind so that I am on the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. It's like the example I think I might have given one of them, like how I got to Harvard. Like, did I go through an application process? I picked up the phone and called. Like, who does that? And like, why did I do that? I don't know why. But a certain amount of information had congealed in my brain that I didn't need to not have the faith to do that. If someone asked me now, do I think that would work? I would say probably not. But don't listen to me. There are two ways you can navigate the world. Mm-hmm. One is with instructions, and the other is with your inner voice. And I strongly recommend that people use as their primary navigational instrument their inner voice.
I don't know of a single child out there that's going with the instruction method.
No, exactly, right.
When we go with that inner voice, are we in a co-creation of our reality?
I think we always are. And just for the simple fact that whether we are soft, empathic, connected, warm, I don't think you have to be like how the spiritual world carries itself off to be spiritual. You can be a grump. You can be someone who doesn't like things that are intangible. You can be an engineer. You can be a factualist. You don't have to be a blissed out person to be spiritual. So I think that we all have brains, and the brains are in our heads and in our skulls, and our skulls have holes in them. So whether you like it or not, your brain is connected to every other brain in the universe because you have ears, and nose, and eyes, and the whole world is connected in that way. So for me to ever say, this is mine, I did it, I created it, I find it kind of a joke, but a lot of things, a lot of my own thoughts. How could this be my thought? I'm reading every day, I'm thinking every day. I feel like our whole reality is co-created all the time. And I think we resist co-creation because it threatens identity. I would say one of the biggest anxieties at a psychological level that people experience is disintegration anxiety. that comes from merger with the world and the threat of loss of identity. But that's one of the biggest misnomers, I believe, because even though I myself, I think, have that anxiety, because I'm afraid of just losing control, like I think most people are, at some level, I think if we realize that we're truly connected, we'll lose the freneticism. We'll lose the frenetic. It's like once you learn how to swim, you don't just try to do all kinds of frenetic things in the water. You learn how to swim, so you know how to navigate this. I think that the spiritual world is a world in which you cannot walk anymore. It'll be like walking on water. You really have to learn metaphorically how to swim. And I think those ways, I actually believe strongly that authenticity responds to aesthetic. If you're somebody who's like, I don't like all this weird stuff these guys are talking about, like, why are they talking about all this soft stuff that you can't... Well, art. Go to a museum by yourself. And it doesn't even have to be a museum. If you like watches, go to a watch store. If you like car parts, go to... I used to think of myself as the most impractical person when it came to fixing anything or doing anything. I developed a love affair with Home Depot, which is just... I'd go to every department and I'd be like, what is this amazing thing? And people would be shocked because I like nice things. I like chandeliers. I like decorated environments. All of a sudden, it's just the smell of Home Depot. Any chance I got to go to Home Depot, I would be like in the car and off to Home Depot because I just love something that's happening there. It's like all these fragments of the world are there, and you can co-create. You can say, hey, that light you made, I'm taking it to my house. And hey, those screws you created, I'm taking it to my house. And all of a sudden, I've got like some person who's probably in China who made some instrument. That person's consciousness is in my house, in my cabinet. Like, that's kind of amazing. I mean, our entire surroundings are made up of the consciousnesses of people who've created things. I'm in a hotel right now. And in this hotel, it's like, how many people before me have stayed in this room? How many people have made the furniture in this hotel? So we're never really as alone as we think we are. I think we are constantly surrounded by consciousness other than our own.
It begets the question, a radical question to go to here, but I can't see how we can avoid it. Is there a you?
Well, so yes and no. So I think that the way that the you develops, one of the ways, is with the grasp reflex, right? So when children are, before they develop their sense of identity, before they can say me versus you, the grasp reflex is one of those things, when they hold it, like sometimes you give the baby a thumb and nothing's happening, suddenly they hold it. And when they hold it, what they're saying is, wait a minute, like subject, object, they're separate. So in that instance, they start to develop the sense of separateness that they have. The paradox is, and that actually activates the parietal lobe in the brain. One of the things we know is that when we meditate, it deactivates that part. And all of a sudden, you are now not separate from the world. So if you say to me, is there a you? I would say as a referent, yes, meaning for the purposes of having a passport and having some kind of ID and booking a ticket and having a relationship, yes. But if you ask me, do I think my you is separate from you? I would say no. And if you ask me, do I think that I have some kind of uniqueness? See, I don't see myself as, when I'm able to, and this is not all the time, but when I'm able to, and I'm brought to question this, I don't think I'm separate from anything in the world. Like how can I be if I believe that consciousness is all over and consciousness is permeating everything? Then I am connected to everybody else through consciousness. So I forget that, I think, from time to time. And when I forget that, it's probably when I suffer most. I think when I remember that is when I realize that the answers you're seeking are out there. It's like someone once told me the story about the person, the Maharishi who ran the Transcendental Meditation movement. Yeah. And when he asked for, everybody decided they needed to build more things, that they needed more money. And so he said, well, go out and buy this number of cars. And people said, where are we going to get the money from? And his answer was, from where it is. Like, it's somewhere. You simply have to tune in to the location and the mechanism of getting there, and you'll get there. And the mechanism may not be linear. Steve Jobs was famous for saying you can't join the dots. moving forward, you can join them backwards. So you've got to motivate yourself with some kind of gut instinct, some kind of purpose, and you move toward it. But I think when you're looking for something, you don't always have to have your eye on the ball. Look at Roger Federer, how he plays tennis. If you watch him in slow motion, he doesn't look where he's hitting the ball. So what I mean is you don't have your eye on the goal. He doesn't look where he's hitting the ball. He actually just looks at the ball and just executes a perfect stroke. And the ball goes to where he's imagining it needs to go. So I think that we often don't rely on our imaginations and this floatingness, because we've got to have the side wheels on the bicycle of consciousness all the time. We're like, wait a minute, let's be rational. Wait a minute, I'm separate. Because once you merge into the greater whole, the ways of navigation are different. You've got to figure out different ways of swimming. Breaststroke, backstroke. You have to figure out how you get there. And I don't even think it's just swimming. I think there's something about us all. This is a belief, not a fact. But I believe that there's something about us all that is non-local. In the most literal sense, we're starting to show this with technology, right? Because I may be in New York right now, but I'm also on your desk in front of you, right? I mean, my voice is there. And then when everyone who's listening to this, I'm going to be with them as well. So is identity really local? And is our technology perhaps giving us the opportunity to see that identity is not as local as we think it is? That actually we can be in multiple places all at once. Like I can be here, and I can be with you, and I can be with every person who will listen to this as well.
How do we bridge this paradox, or how do we bridge between these two paradoxes or these two worlds in a sense, so that we can swim and navigate in the new world? This is something that a lot of people ask us about with this show or send emails. It's a huge leap of faith.
It is. And I think, so in terms of how you bridge this, a couple of ways, things I would want to say. If you asked Krishnamurti this question, Krishnamurti was an atheist scholar who was in an interview with Houston Smith, who was a theosophist, who was actually a theologian at MIT. He wanted to know, is complete lucidity possible? And he asked him this, and he said yes, and he said how, and he said by not asking the question how. So the idea is, if you want to know how, then try to abandon the how, is number one. Number two, that does not mean you don't use a method. It means you discover your method. You go inside yourself and ask yourself, for me, what would be the best first step? Or what would be the best second step? And if you ask yourself that question, then you're much more likely to construct a method. Now, that aside, if I had to provide a framework for how it is you can make this bridge, I would say the first thing is to simply not be in this focus mode. That you must deliberately build unfocused periods into your day for mind wandering, for meditation, for possibility thinking. 15 minutes twice a day is a great way to start, and then start increasing that. And I would say the second thing is to explore what's on your mind. So, for example, I gave a talk in Amsterdam recently, and someone came to me from the audience and said, and I had in my mind that something was happening in the movie world that I wanted to become part of, and I wasn't quite sure how. But that was sort of at the back of my mind. I was very present in the talk. The person from the audience came up to me and said, hey, I'm making a documentary movie. My partner is in New York. We're doing it in Happiness. We'd love to have you in the movie. Would you mind meeting with him? I said, no, that sounds great. I'll be there next week anyway. We'll set up a meeting. I see his partner, and I suddenly realized I haven't read enough about him. So with 2 minutes, I decided rather than look up all the facts and figures, I'm just going to Google image him. So I Google imaged him and saw him and had an intuitive sensibility about who he was. And something in me started to laugh. I was just like, oh my God, we think we're meeting about something, but we're meeting about something else. And so when I saw him, we said hello, and he said, thank you so much for meeting. Yeah, my partner is really interested in your being in this movie. And I said, I know we're meeting ostensibly about the movie, but it's apparent to me that something much larger is happening. And he said, oh, I'm interested, let me know. And we sat down, and that just started a very big conversation. So if you ask, how do you do that? You say it. I mean, he could have said, I don't know what you mean, but I'm here about the happiness program. So can I tell you that? That's fine. He can shut it down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the idea is if you feel something, say it, but say it if you feel like it's authentic. You know, like I wouldn't just go around to every meeting and say something bigger is happening here. But I think with you, for example, there is something bigger happening. I don't really know what it is. So my feeling is it's important when you have something on your mind and you feel, especially some kind of positive energy, put it out there and put it out as a question. And I think I put it out with humility. I wasn't saying, listen, I know what's happening here. Something bigger is happening, and I think this is happening. I don't know what's happening. I just know that when I feel like something is happening, I'll sometimes call it out because I feel like it helps me navigate that path so I can decide what it is. So if you ask me what's happening between us, I would say we started off having a fairly literal discussion. I think we sensed each other's spirituality. We then decided, let's share this with the world in some way so that the world can reflect on our reflections and people can deepen their own self-inquiry. And I feel like the theme of self-inquiry and how do we get to the next stage is still in front of us. Like if you ask me, well, do you feel like your conversations with Michael have ended? I would say no. I don't think they've ended. There's something is beginning, actually. And I think it's beginning through whatever this lens is. So I feel like when it comes to, in terms of how you develop this, building small periods of time, saying what's in your mind, and I think really making sure you can stabilize yourself with your psychological center of gravity, because when you stabilize yourself with your psychological center of gravity, you are giving yourself the stability to move in that space. So,
what does that mean?
So your mental six-pack. So basically, in the same way that you need to stabilize your core to move muscles, you also need to have authenticity, curiosity, this kind of positive constructive daydreaming so that you're recalling more memories in order for you to feel richer in this navigational space. Otherwise, you lose, you're off kilter. It's like if I came to this conversation as, hi, I'm a Harvard professor and I know everything. I know a lot about the brain, so just ask me about the brain. I wouldn't know what to say to you because I wouldn't know how to speak or where to speak from. It's just not true. I can't. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I'm not just saying that to be humble. There's a lot I don't know. So knowing that I don't know allows me to lean toward you. And it allows me to say, I'm going to tell you the stuff I know, and the stuff I don't know, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. From there, where do we go with our kids on this path?
I think practically speaking, I think I've seen a lot of families where kids actually learn to meditate at a much younger age. They do things like yoga. If yoga is not your thing, making sure you spend outdoor time as well as indoor time. Studies show that outdoor walking increases creativity more than indoor walking. Going on undetermined paths rather than just around the block helps you become more creative. Encouraging play is really important. It actually improves attention and improves curiosity, and rough and tumble play, especially sort of, just rolling around and being with your kids, can actually increase your level of attention. So I think you want to do that. I think you also want to instill a sense of curiosity, like the school I mentioned in my book called Brightworks, which has a tinkering school. They do some amazing things at that school. So, for example, one way in which they paint is they have them fill balloons with paint, and then they climb up a rafter, and they drop these paintful balloons onto canvases that have nails on them. And so they all burst, and as a result, you get this thing that looks like a Jackson Pollock type of abstraction just from playing and being curious. And the point here is that you can bring your own identity to the table, and people don't have to agree with you for you to have an interesting conversation. Like, I love when people who are extreme rationalists are talking to me, because I feel like they are spiritual. They just don't want to call themselves that, and they feel like, well, you are rational. You just want to act like you're thinking of spiritual. It doesn't. I don't mind differences at all. I feel like it would be really helpful. Yeah, so I feel like it would be really helpful to help children explore and to help them recognize that differences are an opportunity, that you can have a sense of self and an identity, and that identity can be enriched by differences as well. I actually said this to a friend of mine recently, and we had an interesting conversation around it because I was actually in Paris in the dining room, and I was looking at this family. There was an American family, and there was a little child, and he was dressed in a very preppy way, and he had his tie on and his jacket, and he was looking very proudly at how they were carving the Peking duck. And so I FaceTimed a friend of mine and said, "You got to see the scene. It's kind of amazing. It's like the child is absorbing the sense of identity from watching the carving of the duck." And the friend was like, "Man, that kind of spooks me." Like, what do you mean? I just don't like the thought of anything getting carved. Like, I don't really want my kids. Like, I wouldn't want my kid to be like standing so proudly, looking at a duck being carved, because it's just not like part of my repertoire of things I want my child to be exposed to. And I said, what's so cool about this is that each of these people can inform the other person's perspective on their own sensibilities, their own feelings. And I think there's a wonderful way to travel through the world with different kinds of people. And it's not about tolerance. I really think it's about curiosity as well. And one of the reasons I love New York City is that it systematically gets rid of my prejudices. Because there's people here from everywhere, all kinds of personalities. I always have these preconceived notions, I think everybody does, about who people are. Then I hear them, and I'm like, I was totally wrong, all the time. So raising children to have this appreciation, I think, is fantastic. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. A sense of nationalism or a sense of personal identity doesn't have to exclude a sense of connection. I think they can travel together. And I think one of the richest things to do is, I would say one of the biggest lessons my mother taught me implicitly was that feelings were okay. So, I had a ton of friends as a child, and I think I would come home after playing the whole day outside, come home and say, "Mom, why do I feel lonely?" And my brother would say, "What are you talking about? You have more friends than God. Like, what? That's crazy. Like, how can you be lonely?" And I said, "I don't know." And she'd said, "Darling, sometimes life's like that. Why don't you have a bath and let's get ready for dinner?" And suddenly I thought, it's okay to be lonely. So I feel like there are feelings we try to eradicate. I don't think we need to say it's okay, even, because I feel like in some way that's also a little bit demeaning. But I think you can say sometimes it happens in life, that life's like that. So I think that these basic principles around curiosity, around play, around integration, around paradox, like integration and nationalism can travel together, and around this feeling of understanding that thoughts and feelings are both important to help someone grow, are things that can be really helpful to children as they're emerging in the world.
Couldn't we say that about ourselves as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's so key to be able to take those same principles, and when you're holding the teddy bear, activate those principles as well.
I never thought I'd have Teddy on the show. So on that note, go ahead.
I said he's a cute teddy. I like him a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, he's traveled the world, and I typically put him in my backpack where his head is actually sticking out, and that actually I know it flips a switch in people. They're going, "Why is this nicely dressed man have a backpack on with a teddy?" And they're wondering, is it a gift that he's giving to him, or what is going on? But it blows their minds.
Right.
And I like that.
Right.
So in the mind-blowing category, if I took off my coaching hat, if I put it on you today, what one homework assignment would you give people, maybe to help them become their own bridge?
I would say choose one time of the day, a 15-minute period, in which you dedicate, I think, exclusively to discovering your spiritual self. And I think you can do this through any of the books and the methods that I've mentioned in the book. which are things like positive constructive daydreaming or doodling. But I think from this conversation, I think one way you can start to do this is to write out things that you sense that you have no evidence of. And then explore those hypotheses so that you can see if the facts back that up or not. But too often we ignore our intuition. And when you ignore intuition, you're removing a vital piece of how you can navigate the world. So to build it, you have to actually activate the insula, which picks up all these subtle sensations and then communicates it to the cortex. It's important for you to notice the things that you sense and say, am I acting on this the way I should be? Sometimes you sense people are a little dangerous, but you still continue the relationship. Sometimes you sense that you don't really want to be living somewhere and it's kind of not making you happy, or your job's fine, but it's really not that fine. Or, maybe this one food, maybe you want to eliminate that from your diet. You sense it, but you haven't done it. Mm-hmm. Every day, find a thing that you sense and then start to explore that.
What fires together, wires together. You are going to be building their intuition.
That's right.
One of the things, I guess just as a side note, I was thinking it brought up Einstein, who's saying, what is it, something like real education begins, or real learning begins once you've forgotten your education.
That's right.
We have this intuition until we're gone into a place of memorization and rote feedback, or rote, however you call that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think any kind of rote thinking is problematic when it's just habit pathways that are taking over your brain and you're not living outside of that habit. So I think intuition is a really powerful force that can help modify that simply by asking, what do I sense? And am I paying attention to
Woohoo!
it?
So on that note, what personally brings you, I know I've asked you this before, but I love asking this question because it brings out that childlike joy. Right. What brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Today I'm going to say that I'm not sure that I'm looking for happiness. I would say that I'm probably looking for something beyond happiness, because I think where there's happiness, there's sadness. Mm-hmm. And I think emotions travel together as poles. I think what I would like to strive for is transcendence. And I think I feel transcendence when it is initiated by the love of myself toward people around me and those people toward me. And when I can feel that in that space there's an ability to let go of all of the kinds of trappings of my day-to-day existence or identity, and just even one little shift toward greater authenticity, I would say brings me immense happiness. And to me, having the teddy bear was sort of a major shift in my life.
I love it. Forever this will be, and someday I hope to see your teddy bear as well, yeah. The teddy bear interview.
Yes.
So where can people go to find out more and to find your phenomenal book, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try?
So they can go to dr.srini.com, drsrinipillay.com. And the book is available in any major bookstore or on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. So I would love for people to take a look at it and let me know what they think about it. And we have a lot of, I think, supportive ways of interacting with people around this, depending on whether they're in corporations or whether they're thinking about this in their personal lives. There are ways that we can apply these principles and help you apply these principles in your life as well. So thank you for the opportunity to offer this to the people who listen to you.
Beautiful. And the URL one more time.
It's dr.srini.com. So it's drsrinipillay.com.
Fantastic. And if you didn't catch dr.srinipillay.com, come on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to dr.srinipillay.com. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with people?
I think today is about thinking about your spiritual self beyond your perceptual self and recognizing that the greatness that you are seeking exists within and outside of you. And that looking for that connection is a very worthwhile endeavor, because it will grow your connection to the rest of the world and give you access to the answers that you're looking for.
One of the greatest, if perhaps not the greatest, endeavor you could undertake.
I think so.
I couldn't agree more. Do you have time for a brief meditation? If not, totally understand.
Yeah, let's do that. Like, let's do that for at least a minute or so. I'll sort of ask people to close their eyes.
Mm-hmm. Unless you're driving down the road.
Right. No closing your eyes if you're driving down the road. But yeah, just close your eyes for a second and pay attention to your breathing. Place your attention like a flashlight on your breath. And then say to yourself, I have intuitive capabilities. My brain is wired for intuitive capabilities. It has been shown that my brain can process subtle sensations and give me the intuition that I need to guide my life forward. Now that I know that, I'm going to be thinking of my intuition as my favorite object or color. So if your favorite object is a teddy bear, be thinking about your teddy bear as your intuition. If your favorite color is orange, be thinking of orange. And now what we're going to do is enter a meditation where the symbol of intuition that you have created by yourself, for yourself, is the point of attention and primary acknowledgement. So let's place our attention, take it away from the breath, to the image of the symbol of your intuition. And let's just keep it there, and I'll be silent for a while. Think of this as a primary acknowledgement of your power, and whenever you can, repeat this acknowledgement so that your intuition is never lost. And gently open your eyes.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Srini.
Thank you,
This has been phenomenal, as always.
Yeah, it's always fantastic speaking with you. So thank you very much.
It goes both ways. Crank it back up for the finish here. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, and crank up your intuition today and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Srini.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!